You will witness true horror.
Caelid. Just the name of this decrepit ecosystem in Elden Ring is enough to give me the shivers. I remember playing it for the first time and the dread I felt as I made my way through the divine sickness, an affliction that spread through the land after a catastrophic battle between demigods. Dogs have grown to the size of cattle. Remaining soldiers are driven mad and putrefied by the rot. Even the ambient life, the fungi, the bones, the twitching piles of limbs seem caught in a state of perpetual mutation. And yet, the longer I spent here, slowly wading through shallow lakes and observing creatures that seem to worship the rot, the more it began to feel like a system. Caelid is a functioning biome that is so warped by affliction that its ecosystem doesn't resemble anything we'd recognize as natural. Yet somehow, it still operates with its own rules and logic. Life persists here, not in spite of the rot, but through it. In most games, ecosystems serve as nothing more than a shorthand. So tell me if this sounds familiar. Forests mean safety. Deserts mean hardship. Snowy mountains mean mystery. They are environments that feel like they've been part of a familiar game vocabulary for so long that designers return to them just because we've learned how to read them. And that isn't a bad thing, but some games, and even the natural world, can stray so far from them that they feel less like environments and more like ecosystems from a forgotten world. So what I'd like to do today is explore the unique and hidden ecosystems in games to see what lies beneath the familiar terrain. Speaking of which, before we move on to biomes like this or this, let's start with the zone that is associated so strongly with starting areas and tutorials. The first time I started up the 2014 game The Forest, I was almost expecting the entire journey to consist of a lush green wilderness you'd expect from any open world survival game. But that isn't the experience the forest offers. It takes the most familiar biome we know, the most comforting and archetypal, and slowly starts filling it with disturbing life forms. Starting up the game, I began with the usual survival loop: chopping wood, crafting tools, and building my first shelter. Maybe the genre did get a bit stale. But that's where the 2014 version stands out, because these actions, rather than making the world more familiar, trigger a reaction from the surrounding ecosystem. It only took a few hours for me to realize the forest I landed in is a living, territorial system, because as time went on, I constructed my first base, built structures, and slowly grew my ecological footprint. But as it turned out, this entire time, the woods were watching me and responded with increasing intensity. The passive wilderness gradually reveals itself as a hostile, reactive web of interlinked systems with attacking cannibals and mutants. I remember the first time I ran into this creature called Virginia. I honestly had to take a break and leave for a few days. Whatever it was I was doing to the forest, it was not worth running into that abomination for. Unlike most survival games where the environment exists to be conquered, this game sees the player as an ecological intruder. And while it continued to become harder and harder for me to keep myself alive, I couldn't help but be impressed by the deep mechanical subversion that was at work here. Minecraft, Valheim, and Terraria show players that after you build your first home, forests are safe, manageable, and yours to explore. But in the forest, building a home doesn't mark stability. It marks you for death. It's a rare thing for a game to kind of undo a biome, to take something as recognizable as a forest and corrupt it from something as warm and welcoming as this to an attacking biome. The truth is, that reframing doesn't just work in the context of this game, or any game for that matter, because it's exactly how ecosystems work in reality. In the natural world, there is no such thing as a passive environment. A forest isn't just a couple of trees, but a system of nutrients, predators, decay, and adaptation that can sustain life for decades. Like here, I can punch down my first tree in Minecraft, and except for my neighbor yelling at me to replant a sapling, there are no far-reaching consequences for the ecosystem. Try punching down a tree in real life. Actually, Don't do that, and it will reshape light access, root systems, soil composition with new species arriving and old ones leaving. Even walking through a meadow can scatter seeds, alter insect patterns, and set off a tiny invisible cascade of change just because someone decided their morning walk could use a little more nature. Even in the far reaches of our world, there exists a forest where the trees have grown legs, with roots that don't dig into soil, but sprawl outward like fingers groping through brine. And in this space between land and sea, mangroves form dense, tangled forests that flood and drain with the tides. But few people actually explore here because, in reality, these places are humid, full of insects, and easy to get lost in. As soon as something with a few too many legs lands on your neck, it's obvious the mangrove is less ecotourism and more bio-horror. And in games, it looks even more impossible. Mangroves are messy, visually dense, and there's no obvious direction. It's not that these ecosystems are impossible to implement, it's just that they don't behave the way we'd expect a virtual environment to behave. And if I had to pick one game that simulates an unpredictable ecosystem better than anything I've ever played, it is, without a doubt, RainWorld, thanks to its comprehensive system of procedurally generated animation and unique AI. Perhaps one reason we so rarely see ecosystems like this is because they are, quite simply, brutal. I don't know how else to say this, but existing here is seriously unforgiving. This game offers a world I wouldn't recommend exploring unless you're ready to see the slug cat die a lot. Also, it's impossible to make a video about ecosystems without at least mentioning RainWorld. But that is for good reason, because this world isn't hostile in the way most virtual realms are. From the ground up, this land was designed around a web of independent AI creatures with as much autonomy as the player slug cat.
They have as much agency as the player character, so they are moving around the world independently. They're hunting, they're searching for food, they're afraid of things.
And this means that the creatures all exist perpetually on-screen as well as off-screen. So you can walk into a room and stumble upon creatures that have been fighting each other for 20 minutes, or find the remains of prey that was devoured while you were somewhere else. Most importantly, RainWorld doesn't separate AI, animation, and level design because all of them are in service of simulating a single ecological system. The world is built to make it feel like the slug cat has been dropped in a place with its own strange rules, which results in a game that doesn't hold hands, doesn't give control, and doesn't explain itself. This philosophy comes to life most clearly in the exterior biome. When the slug cat first encounters the daddy longlegs, rather than being hand animated, this horrifying creature is built from a physics-based simulation with a central mass tethered to dozens of procedural tentacles. It moves by evaluating, frame by frame, where to grab and where to let go, calculating terrain contact and adjusting its body weight accordingly. Also, it's blind and hunts entirely by sound, which creates moments where the slug cat can hear it before seeing it, ominously twitching towards a noise and then going in for the kill. Or this moment where it gracefully falls to its death from off-screen. RainWorld is truly the most unpredictable and hauntingly alive ecosystem in gaming, and the reason we might never explore another ecosystem like it is because the AI and animation of its critters are extremely labor-intensive, unscalable, and 100% in service of the atmosphere. Perhaps most interestingly, moving through RainWorld reveals that its surroundings are almost entirely built on decay and rot from a fallen civilization. And saying built on is an important distinction because it's very clear that life here continues. Lizards still hunt for what's left and plants still bloom, even if their roots now wrap around broken machinery. It's ecosystems like these that are built atop the remnants of a world that once tried and failed, that resist the traditional approach of exploration. And stop me if I'm the only one, but that's exactly what makes digging them up so fascinating. And this is the mindset that leads us right back to Caelid. Because for all the grotesque spectacle, it's not the wasteland it looks like it is. Scarlet Rot, the blight that ravaged this region, is more than a visual motive or gameplay mechanic. It's the ecological curse that reshapes everything it touches. Trees become conduits for spore clouds, and even the creatures worship the rot with dark rituals, or perhaps more than rituals. They are just organisms fulfilling their role in the cycle, because not even the mightiest creatures, it seems, are safe from succumbing to a disturbed ecosystem. Perhaps it's a creative drive to chase the dream of a world that frames corruption as continuity rather than failure. A system that didn't just survive a complete collapse, but somehow found a self-sustaining state within it, where Rainworld proposes a nature crafted from scarcity and fear. Caelid offers one built from rot and disease. Both ecosystems don't wait around to neatly be cataloged and understood. They simply are, in their own way, thriving, adapting, consuming, and indifferent to whether a slugcat belongs in it or not. And maybe that is why these ecosystems are so rarely explored. It's a difficult thing to tell a player, this world is not yours, and it never was. There is a looming presence in these ecosystems that suggests decay and adaptation as ecological inevitabilities. But there's another question hiding in the margins. Because what happens when an ecosystem is engineered instead of born? In the 1990s, ecologists and engineers tried to answer that question by collaborating on closed biosphere experiments. Huge domes with sealed environments inside that were meant to simulate what life is like on other planets. Biosphere 2 attempted to recreate Earth's ecosystem under a dome of glass with a rainforest, a desert, and surprisingly, even a small ocean. As expected, it only took a few years before the system collapsed in on itself. Oxygen levels plummeted, ants and cockroaches thrived while human life suffocated. It was the biggest Earth science experiment, but all it showed was that ecosystems cannot be built like machines. But what if they could? Scorn offers a world that is stitched together in flesh and steel. Instead of a living ecosystem, it presents an assembled biological system. Actually, the biological and industrial realm aren't exactly distinct anymore. Don't think forests or swamps, but digestive tracts and factories as systems that devour and repurpose every living thing within reach. While playing Scorn, I felt like I was placed in the role of a sentient farm animal on my way to slaughter, aware enough to perceive the nightmare, but powerless to escape it. The enormous, indifferent machines all working to carry out their ancient routines without explanation or pause. Things here simply happen with the dreadful inevitability that suggests they always have. From the moment I fell from the Genesis wall, a grotesque birthing monolith that ejects humanoids like failed prototypes, I was thrust into an environment that doesn't welcome life but manufactures it. So if the Genesis wall produces a newborn and it doesn't serve a function, it immediately dies. As I was wandering through the wastes of the field, red tendrils were slithering across like fungal nerve endings. Vents become home for strange masses of tentacles like the only life forms that can survive here are parasitic growths. Venturing deeper to the assembly, I discovered a biome so grotesque that it no longer really resembled an environment, and instead it looked more like an organism. Even interacting with the technology was never as simple as pressing a button and is instead highly disturbing. Machines move unknown mass around, strange drones feed tissue towers, and forgotten humanoids hang in pods like cells in suspended metabolism. This entire realm is a digestive system caught mid-swallow, and this ecosystem doesn't have observers or even prey. It only has input. I was a resource moving through biomes that evolved beyond the line where biology ends and machinery begins. There's a reason we rarely venture into mangroves or parasite-ridden halls as ecosystems. Some of it is mechanical because these environments are hard to build, harder to navigate, and hardest to make readable. And hear me out on this because there's definitely a bad and ugly way to guide a player through a game. I'd like to never see a giant yellow marker again, but there is usually a high point as a guide, a glowing item, a path that leads the way forward. But it's difficult to put a golden trail through a mangrove. No, press A to understand under the mycelium. Forests and mountains are much easier to mythologize. They're already the settings of so many stories and fables to the point that we've been trained to look at a peak and know that climbing it would be heroic. But what does it mean to ride your horse through a fungal marsh? Because unlike a mountain with its clear heroic ascent, I can't say Elden Ring's Liurnia of the Lakes has ever sparked a heroic urge to discover what secrets lurk in its murky pools. Maybe it's just cultural imagination that favors the vertical and the majestic. But even death and decay can be majestic in its own way. There's a place in Blasphemous where a biome seems to be built from death, set in the cursed land of Custodia. This game is a side-scrolling action game soaked in penitence and bodily horror. It draws heavy inspiration from Catholic iconography and Spanish religious art, but changes those influences into a vision of sanctity that feels rotten from the inside out. The guilt and sorrow of Custodia's inhabitants stems from a miserable greater being called the Miracle that slowly turned every biome into an ossuary, a sanctified corpse that's been repurposed into something between holy and eldritch. Grievance Ascents exemplifies this as an ecosystem of grief. The whole area looks like some sort of tomb where the workers that built the city on top of it are buried with their weeping reverberating upwards to a giant bell. Instead of being a place designed for life to continue, it's a place where death has rooted so deeply that it has become life. And while Blasphemous isn't entirely interested in simulating a traditional ecosystem, I think the idea of a necrobiome is fascinating in its own way. The way a landscape is transformed to accommodate death, the creatures that are attracted to a biome built out of bones. The term I'm using, necrobiome, is borrowed from real-world ecology to describe life that emerges because of death. When a large animal dies, like a deer or cow, its body doesn't just disappear without consequence. A single carcass can become the epicenter of activity as a temporary biome. A place blooming from death like this will have multiple life forms arriving within hours. Blowflies, beetles, and maggots begin their work immediately, and with them, death becomes fertile. Nutrients flood the soil as bacteria bloom and fungi branch outward. If you were to visit one of these places after some time, you'll often find the area even greener than before. In nature, a death is not a grave but a dynamic system that, in its own way, feeds the world around it. In the game The Midnight Walk, it's darkness that serves as a metaphor for death, casting the entire world into a state of relentless scarcity after the disappearance of the sun. The framework of the ecosystem here departs significantly from conventional biological systems, instead showcasing a system governed by the interplay of light and darkness as energetic and destructive forces. This world, referred to as the work table, is a metaphysical construction site, because almost every asset in the Midnight Walk is made from handcrafted clay. Over 700 physical models were sculpted, photographed, and digitized to populate the game's strange terrain. And that isn't so much an aesthetic decision as it is a conceptual one. The use of clay reinforces the game's central theme of creation, abandonment, and decay by positioning the environment as a kind of diorama in decline. The handmade origins of the world speak to the narrative of something once carefully crafted and then left behind. At the heart of the Midnight Walk is a single flame cradled by a character named Potboy. In a world without sun, he is the only bearer of light and with it, all that is left of life. His flame is both illumination and creation, warming the world and briefly pushing back against the slow rot that spreads through the land. In conventional ecosystems, you'd find organisms that convert sunlight into life. But here, Potboy kind of is the sun, and because of that, everything in the world either clings to him or tries to take him, because darkness is not just a gentle absence of life. It is a living, corroding force that gives shape to the world's most horrifying creatures. From its depths crawl beings like the too many limbed monsters or the loathsome Mulgrim, who I couldn't help but make a creature analysis short for. Seriously, this game has some of the most fascinating oddities I've ever seen. But it is also these creatures that are the system's apex predators, who are drawn not to flesh, but to fire, the only flame left in the work table. And that's the thing about an ecosystem at the tipping point, where one fragile flame is all that stands between life and complete annihilation. The journey in Midnight Walk to rekindle the sun is a quest for ecological restoration, an attempt to rewrite a world that is perhaps not defined by its decay, but by the ability to recover. Perhaps the most haunting real-world necrobiome isn't hidden in some deep forest or flesh factory, but sprawled across hundreds of square kilometers in Eastern Europe. After the meltdown in 1986, the Chernobyl exclusion zone was evacuated and abandoned, but it didn't stay empty for long. Over time, it became one of the most unintentional and fascinating ecological experiments of the modern age. When the people left, the pressures that typically sculpt modern ecosystems like logging, hunting, and urban sprawl literally vanished overnight. And in that vacuum, something wild was able to creep back in. Former fields gave way to forest, crop fields surrendered to thickets and shrubs, entire landscapes changed themselves into something denser and rougher. Life was able to return, leading to the development of a new, overgrown ecosystem. Even though radiation was still lingering in the area, animal populations surged because, for many species, the absence of humans was a better deal than the presence of fallout. And that isn't to say that this is entirely a story of nature's triumph, because there are mutations and failures present in the animal population. Insects show higher rates of genetic aberrations. Birds have been observed with smaller brains and deformed beaks. The forest may not be clean, but it is alive. Ultimately, it's difficult to think of ecosystems as anything other than balanced and full of life. But the truth is, even the richest systems, real or imagined, begin where something else has ended. A carcass in the woods, a flame in the dark, an industrial biome made out of flesh. Even in fiction, I find myself drawn to worlds where decay is the blueprint, because the ecosystems we don't explore offer a different kind of story. Not so much about dominion or moving forward, but persistence. They might be hard to navigate and understand, but if we choose to go there, to follow the untraditional, what we might find is a unique and beautiful structure hidden within the horror. Hey, thank you for watching as always. So this probably doesn't come as a surprise, but I really like looking at ecosystems and the creatures that live in them, especially the ones that are, you know, a little messed up. So if you want more bite-sized content like the short video I mentioned about the loathsome Mulgrim, make sure to check out my creature analysis playlist with more upcoming videos about Rainworld's Daddy Longlegs and the Forest Virginia. They are pretty insane under a magnifying glass. So with that, let me know what you'd like to see in the next video. Don't forget to like, comment, and hit the bell notification icon, and I'll see you in the next video.